Morning to those of you here in the room. Hello to everybody online. Glad you're here. I'm Pastor Amy, and I am the executive pastor here. Glad to be part of this series as we prepare our hearts and our minds for Easter. And we're talking about how the last steps of Jesus help set us up for our first steps in our relationship with him. And I wonder, how many times have you been in a situation that you didn't realize it was going to be the last, right? You didn't know that at the time. And you kind of have this longing, you look back for it, and you have this longing for a little bit more. Maybe it's not so serious. Maybe it's just a little bit more fun. For me, if you know me, you know I like ice cream. And my favorite right now is I have to drive out of town. And if I go to DeBrand's Chocolate, if you know DeBrand's Chocolate, it's fancy schmancy chocolate, and it's so good. And I didn't realize that they would put it on ice cream. It is like the best. And it's this little baby scoop, in my mind, a baby scoop, and it's covered with chocolate that hardens up. Kind of think like a dipped cone times 1,000,000 times better. It is so good. And when I get to the end of that, I'm always like, oh, I wish I could order 2 scoops. This is just not quite enough, right? Or maybe you're a reader, or you're like a movie watcher, and you get to the end of a series, and you're like, oh, kind of almost sad, because that's the end of a series, and these characters have been part of your daily life for a while, and now you don't know what to do anymore because they're not part of your life. The series is over. And then in parenting, last year, your phones, they make sense of your life for better, for worse. And last year was my firstborn in their senior year, and I was getting all these reels about things like, you didn't know the last time they would sit on your lap before they grew up, the last time they would hold your hand. I'm like, why is this encouraging? Why are you sending this to my phone, right? I think as the disciples looked back in reflection, I think there were probably a lot of last moments with Jesus. Maybe the last miracle they got to see, maybe the last interaction that puzzled them, that they were still confused about. And this, what we know today, was the Last Supper. And it's more than just their last meal together. This was the Passover. It was originally known as the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and it was a week-long celebration. And one night, the meal night, was the Passover. And so it kind of just became where this was known as the Passover. And that's, when we think of the Last Supper, that's what was happening. And the Passover was a celebration time. It was meant to celebrate the fact that the Jews were liberated from slavery from Egypt. So it was a celebration for their whole people. So think of it kind of like if we had the independence kind of feeling and the civic pride of 4th of July mixed with a community meal of Thanksgiving, mixed with the joy of Christmas, mixed with the spiritual significance of Easter. The Passover was a big deal. So as they thought back on the Last Supper, I know they were noticing all sorts of things. And the Passover meal was, the big part of it was called the Seder meal, and the Seder means sequence, and there were 15 steps in sequence for this meal. It was a very immersive experience. Everything meant something. The food, the taste, the smells. They were reminders of the time that they were bound, of the times that they were freed. There was such significance in the entire meal and process. There was time of singing. There was time of prayer. And this whole point was to teach the generations behind them the significance of being freed. And it was this significance that they sit down for the Last Supper. And I'm sure in those days between what we call Good Friday, the crucifixion of Jesus, to resurrection morning, I'm guessing that the disciples thought about every single thing that happened at that meal. I'm guessing they replayed it over and over, trying to gather everything they could and remember everything they could. It was their last significant moment kind of as a team, so to speak, before everything went bad. And so we believe, as this video has been saying, that following the last steps of Jesus helps us find our first steps. And so we're going to look at the book of John, The Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all tell the stories of Jesus from different perspectives. And I want us to look at what John said. He was there, and what he said in reflection of this Last Supper. It's in chapter 13, verse 1. It says, "It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." This to me is super significant. That John, who was there, when he reflects back, he's saying to us, as he's writing the scriptures, he's saying, hey, it was really less about information that he shared with us. It was less about instructions that he gave to us. It was less about teaching. It was more about love. What happened was about love. And as he sets the stage for what he's about to tell, the story, he wants us to realize, hey, this is all about him demonstrating his love for us. I think that's how we need to approach everything in relationship with God. That this book is my guide. This book gives me instructions on how to live, and it's not to restrict me, because when I follow them, my life is better, and it's more full, and more free. But also, this book is less about instruction and less about information, and it should be more about love. When we read it, when we approach it, when we hear from God, it should be more about love. So as we start and we think about this Last Supper, let's put it in our heads that this is a picture of love, because that was John's take when he was there. He goes on in chapter 13. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and he was returning to God. Jesus knew this. He knew the significance that he had come from God and he was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." I can totally relate to Peter, can't you? Can you imagine how long it might have taken for Jesus to be on his knees, going around the room, washing one person's feet after another? Now, they lived in a world where their main mode of transportation was their feet. They walked everywhere, on dusty roads, in sandals. Their feet would have been messy, dirty, stinky, grimy, caked on. And so as Jesus is going around one by one, I just imagine a quietness in the room. I imagine that there is a sense of curiosity, like, what is he doing? And why? And so Simon's the one who has the guts to say it. He gets around to him and he's like, "You don't have to wash mine. I don't know what you're doing, but this is overkill. You do not need to wash my feet." And Jesus is saying, "Hey, if I don't wash you, you don't have any part with me." "Okay, oh, never mind. Flip that over. Wash everything." And so Simon, I think, he's a demonstration of how, like, there's just a curiosity and probably some confusion about what is going on. But as we saw on the slide before, Jesus knew he was about to go to the Father. In fact, in the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 26, Jesus says, "My appointed time is near." He says it out loud in Matthew's account. And so he knew what was happening, and he was deliberate about what he was doing. He didn't just sit down and say, like, "You know what? Man, everybody's feet are dirty today. You know what? I'm going to just do them a favor and wash up those feet." It wasn't like an accidental thinking. It wasn't a happenstance moment. He knew what was about to happen in his life. He knew the cross was coming. And he recognized that, and he was deliberate about his actions. And I believe it was so to be a significant memory for these 12, but also so because it would be a significant part of our faith. As it's included in the Word, and it's the story of Jesus. So what does he decide to do with this moment? What does Jesus do with this intentional moment? He shows us that love is demonstrated in careful care. We care about a lot of things. We care about the weather because we're getting tired of winter. We care about what's for dinner. We care about how much everything costs at the grocery store right now. We care about our pets. We care about our friends and family. But not everything gets carefully cared for, right? There's just not that much attention or energy inside of us. Not everything gets carefully cared for. But when Jesus stooped down low with a bowl of water and a cloth to take care of probably their least cared for part of their body, the messiest, the dirtiest, the smelliest, he was showing them love, and that love carefully cares. I think when their curiosity, their astonishment had to just be so confusing. They have seen him, as we heard in the video, they've seen him walk on water. They've seen him heal people right in front of their eyes. They've seen him multiply a lunch to feed thousands. Shouldn't this be the other way around? Why isn't that I'm not washing your feet, Jesus? Why is it that you're washing mine? But this is love, to carefully care. Nothing glamorous about it. Caring for people in their messiness because he loves them and he loves us. He knows your messiness and he knows mine. And so as we're thinking about this, I just had to ask the question, what would you do if Jesus knelt to wash your feet? I mean, your major mode of transportation is not your feet, but I'm guessing they're still kind of stinky. And I'm guessing it's a little humbling and a little bit embarrassing for you if somebody were to come up to you right now, kneel down in front of you, take your shoes and socks off, and wash your feet. I'm guessing that you would feel a little astonished. I'm guessing you would feel a little caught off guard and maybe humbled and be like Simon Peter, you don't have to do this. Hey, you don't have to do this. It seems unnecessary. I think we have completely minimized this part of the story of the Holy Week. I think we've told it, we've heard it, we know Jesus washed the feet, Last Supper, but I think we have minimized what this would actually have felt like. So do this for me. Just for a second, think of somebody that you admire. Maybe somebody you've never met. So you can think of somebody you listen to their podcast and you like their influence. You pay attention to the things that they say. Maybe you buy their merch. Maybe you're have a little bit of a celebrity crush on them. They could be a pastor, they could be a singer, they could be an athlete, whatever. Just get that person in your mind for just a second. And then take this and put it in perspective. In your interactions with them, can you imagine them washing your feet? Can you imagine how that might feel to you? And yet even you would know they're just a normal person. They didn't walk on water in front of you. They've impressed you in some way, but they haven't healed people in front of you. They haven't done miracles in front of you, right? And how awkward would that be for your imperfect, smelly feet to be uncovered and to be carefully and tenderly cared for? It would probably quiet you down in wonder and captivate you. But this isn't just another person. This is the healer, the creator God. This is the Savior of the world. And so as we continue on in John chapter 13, let's see what else this conversation takes us to. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and he returned to his place. Do you understand what I have done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that's what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. I think if they're quieted down and they're just sitting there thinking, what in the world is he doing? And I think of the time that it takes. wouldn't you think it takes at least 2 minutes to wash one person's feet, right? A minute a foot. So 24 minutes of quiet, perhaps. I'm just throwing out some possibilities here. So 24 minutes of quiet humility, watching Jesus on his knees. And I think possibly they're thinking, what's he going to do next? What's next? And he tells them, you should do as I have done for you. So what's next? He says, we're next. We are what is next. After this moment, he says, we are next. I imagine the room was quiet the whole time, but can you imagine him washing the feet of Judas? And talk about a moment that everybody would replay over and over and over in the next few days or for the rest of their lives. They would replay that moment. I can't believe he washed my feet. I cannot believe he washed Judas's feet. I cannot believe that. When they put all the pieces together and they realized that Judas was the one who sold out Jesus for some silver, Judas has made history. He's being known as the one who betrayed Jesus, led him to the arrest, that led him to crucifixion. And Jesus was even in the same room with him is kind of impressive, right? Have you ever been in a situation where there is somebody that they're just hard to tolerate? They're just hard to tolerate. Being in the same room is a little bit of work. Now, can you imagine getting down on your feet and washing their feet? I can't imagine that. But what it tells me when I think about what Jesus was modeling is that love serves others, even the messy ones. Even the messy ones. We sure don't get off the hook from loving people that are messy when I read this passage. If Jesus can wash the feet of Judas just hours before he's going to lead him to the most excruciating torment of his life, then I think that probably God is telling me to do a little more than bake cookies for my kids' friends. I think probably he's telling me to do a little bit more than, this casual, let me buy your coffee today for the car behind me. All good stuff. Bake those cookies and buy that coffee. But I'm just saying, I think this model of deep love, of careful care, is deeper than that. I think what he's showing us is deeper than that. And I'll be honest, that's kind of a stretch for me. That is inconvenient. And it is not fun. And I would rather bake the cookies and buy the coffee anonymously for the people behind me, because that would be more comfortable for me and less of a stretch for me. It would be way easier. But is it possible that to inconvenience myself, picture Jesus on his knees going around the room? Is it possible that to inconvenience myself is part of the process of me learning to serve and love other people like Jesus did? We just had a team of people who went on a mission trip to the Dominican Republic, and you've heard us talk about them for the last few weeks. So these people that went, they used their work PTO, they used their college spring breaks, and they went on a mission trip to the Dominican Republic. And I want you to know, we did not put them up in a 4-star hotel. They were on the ground in the mission field, and while they were there, they were working. They gave up their PTO and their college spring break to paint other people's houses, to paint grimy little fingernails with nail polish, to walk into places that their translators said, we don't usually go there. In fact, we won't go there with you. But they felt like the Lord was leading them there, and they went. They when they talked to me, if you've had a chance to talk to anybody that was on that trip, when they talked to me about how their hearts are full. They just came back blessed. They came back with like this multiplication factor of like energy and excitement and purpose. Another story. Overheard a friend of mine talking recently. I actually connected her with somebody else. So this other person's daughter was getting hesitant, reluctant to go down to middle school mornings, just kind of having a period of shyness, like just difficult to get over the hump and was not going down to middle school mornings. And so I connected the two because my friend serves in middle school mornings. And she's talking, and she's like, oh, I could totally help her meet other people. I would love to help her get her welcomed. I'm down there 3 out of 4 Sundays a month. So I would love to be the person who can connect her. And then she said this. I was out of the conversation by now. And then she said this, I really don't know why anybody wouldn't want to go down there. I love listening to Pastor Sam preach. I get something out of it every single time. So here she is, serving 3 Sundays out of 4. And then saying, but I get something out of it every single time. I'm going down there to help somebody else, and I get blessed. And I think that we have to recognize God doesn't waste our energy. He has a really cool way of asking you to give and to love and to serve and to be inconvenienced, but he has a really cool way of giving you something back. He's not going to leave you empty-handed. Paul encourages the church in Philippi here in chapter 2, in this same kind of mentality. He says, in your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. So Paul's talking to the church in Philippi, and he's saying, we got to get our minds on the same track as Christ. And this happens in our relationships with other people. And the way we need to do this is take on the nature of a servant. So he says, we need to actively serve other people. This really was not a convenient time for Jesus to serve them. I'm going to guess that those 24 minutes could have been spent a lot of different ways, and I just guessed on the 24, right? But I'm guessing it could have been spent a lot of other ways. What he was about to experience, I think he could have been doing a lot for himself to get spiritually prepared for the cross, to get physically prepared for the cross, to get mentally prepared for the cross. There were plenty of things he needed to do for himself, and instead he's giving of himself. Definitely not a convenient time to serve Judas. Definitely not. I was reading my Bible the other day, and I use a journal Bible in my everyday time with God. And so if ever I go back to a passage that I've already written about, I just pull it out and read what I have written in my journal Bible, because I'm like, oh, let me see what God told me the first time I read this passage in this Bible. So I was in the story of the Good Samaritan, right? You know that story probably. And here's what I wrote in the margin and my reflection. Who is my neighbor? If they are in my life, they are my neighbor. If I have to ask who is my neighbor, that shows me that there are some people I am hoping are not included. And what fair and reasonable excuses did these guys have to not stop and help that day? What fair and reasonable excuses do I have to not live and give mercy out? I need to be better prepared to help, better prepared and willing to slow down and give mercy. I've been given much mercy, and I want it to be said that I am a person who gives out much mercy. If I have to ask myself, who is my neighbor? I'm probably hoping somebody's not on the list, right? That's their human nature of it all. To serve others, we got to have mercy. We've got to have compassion. To serve others, we have to have love. And the reality is, Judas wasn't super lovable that night. He really wasn't. He wasn't super lovable. And I think that Jesus models for us that there are moments, not all the moments. I mean, bake the cookies, right? Buy the coffee. But there are also some moments when somebody's not lovable, and we're called to still love them through God anyway. Serve them because of God anyway. Give out mercy because of God giving that to us anyway. When we look at the last steps of Jesus, we see him modeling serving. He's serving. He's taking care of them with careful care. When we think of the last steps of Jesus, we see him modeling community. He's pulling together his people. He's having this important meal. He's creating this memory that would last for generations and generations because we have that memory now. And he's modeling community. Maybe sometimes we overthink it. Maybe we make it harder than it really has to be. Maybe it's simply looking for opportunities to serve other people and pull our people in, to have community moments. Maybe it's about inviting somebody to have coffee and to talk with them and to share with them what God's doing in our lives. Maybe it's about slowing down at work and recognizing somebody's face looks like they are in a rough stage and actually caring with careful care about what's going on in their life. I think when we think about this, we make it so much harder than it has to be. I use these questions a lot when I'm helping somebody think about their baptism. I think it's good for all of us. If you're sitting across the table having coffee with somebody, if you're at work and you're interacting with somebody, if you're in your yard and do we do that still? Do we still go out in our yards and interact with people? If you are hypothetically in your yard and you're talking to other people across the yard, here's some just basic things. What does God mean to me? Do I have 2, 3, 4 sentences that I can learn to just say that naturally? What has God helped me through in my past? I think I can come up with a lot, actually. Probably could write a book there. But I could come up with 2 or 3 sentences that just start to come out of my mouth more regularly, with more ease. Well, how is God working in my life right now? What's the current story in my life with God? I think I can come up with a few sentences. What if it's not as complicated as getting on our knees and washing feet? What if it's about interacting and serving other people by serving and pointing them to God? By recognizing the best thing we can give them is to turn their eyes up to Jesus. And the way we can do that is tell our own story. Nobody can ever argue with your own story, right? They might try to talk history and archaeology and take you to some, like brainiac level that you have no idea how to discuss. But they can't tear apart your own story with God. That's your story. You know what God's done in your life. And you can find the words to say that. Going to now Matthew's account of this same night in chapter 26. While they were eating, Jesus took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and he gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body." Then he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink from this fruit of the vine from now on until the day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." Jesus is telling his story, that this is his body broken. He's sharing with them what is about to happen on the cross, that he is going to go to the cross to be broken and poured out of love for them, for us too. That's for us. It's no coincidence that this foot washing, this communion, this Last Supper moment happens at the same time as the Passover meal. All the significance of being freed from the Egyptians, freed from slavery, the celebration, the joy, the spiritual significance. It's not a coincidence that this all lines up with Passover week. It's also not a coincidence that you're here today hearing this, that I think God has something for you in all different walks of faith. It's not a coincidence that you're here. What does God mean to you? What has God done in your life in the past? What is he doing right now? Whose feet is he calling you to wash? Who needs to hear your story? God's story. I think that the biggest, the most important way we serve is when we step into sharing his story with others. When we just be real and authentic and we talk with people about what God's done in our lives. And maybe for you, you don't have that story yet. Maybe for some of you here, you haven't had that beginning part of your story with God yet. And so you hear all this, and you've thought about it before, but you've just never done it. I want you to know this Easter week, this is a picture of love. He loves you. He sees your messiness. He's well aware of your messiness. It's not a surprise. And he loves you. He loves you, and he wants to carefully care for you. If we would step into a relationship with him, there is so much more that he has for us on the journey, on our spiritual walk. So as you're thinking about that, I want you to just bow your heads for a minute. Just take a minute. If this is all new to you, I want you to just ask yourself, am I ready? Am I finally going to do this? Am I going to trust God with my future? Am I going to try out this step of faith kind of thing? Do I believe that he loves me and he wants to carefully care for me? With your heads bowed and your eyes closed, if that's you, I just want to lead you for just a moment in a prayer. Just follow along like this. Dear God, I know there's been some other times maybe that you've spoken to me, or maybe this is the first, but I can feel it. I can feel you calling me in your love. And Lord, I know the messy shape I'm in. But I want to choose to trust you. I want to choose to trust that your story with me is a story of love. You're not pointing fingers at me, telling me I should know better. You're embracing me with love. Somehow you're serving me and washing my feet. You chose to go to the cross for me. And so, Lord, I surrender myself to you, and I want to follow you. I want to give you my future. I want to give you my past. And today, I want you to be my Savior. Still keep your heads down, but if that's you, and that was the first time you've done that, would you raise your hand? Just put your hand up for just a moment. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Heads bowed still. Lord, we praise your name, that it's never too late, that it doesn't matter, because you're so ready for us. On the day of our salvation, you pull us in tight and you love us. So Lord, I pray for those people that have just raised their hands for the first time. Lord, don't let anything get in the way, but show them your love and help them as they move forward in their relationship with you. It's in your name we pray. Heads up and eyes up here. If this is the time now where we're going to take communion. So if you've had that stored away and you want to pull that out, as we read, this is what we do in remembrance of what Christ has done for us. As we enter Holy Week, we're preparing ourselves. We're remembering what Christ has done for us. So there should be 2 pieces of white paper, and the smaller one should have the cracker, or what we use is for the bread. You can peel that back, and you should be able to pull out a little wafer like this, a little cracker. You can go ahead and do that now. If you're not ready and you want to do it in a few minutes during worship, you can wait a few minutes. But if you're ready, you can go ahead and peel that back right now. And as we were instructed, you can take and eat. For this is Christ's body that was broken for you. You can eat. You can then peel off the top that has the juice in it. And Jesus said, this is my blood that was poured out for the forgiveness of sins. He knows we're messy, and he's pouring it out to make you white as snow. You can take and drink. We're going to worship. And I pray that everyone in the room just feels his love as we worship. So let's stand together.